Good evening, and welcome to the Putnam Valley Board of Education meeting of May 5th, 2020. Please stand and join me as we salute our flag. I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America
and
to the republic for which it stands,
one
nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good.
That's definitely the most challenging part of the Zoom meeting part.
Is
We should practice that more.
Well, because I think the sound comes in at slight delays.
Yeah, it's not in the same sync. Yeah.
Which makes you amazed when you hear the bands play together or the music videos together, you know, like that's, you know.
And the kids on Zoom are all talking over each other. All right, I'd like to make an announcement that the treasurer's report is for March 2019. Would that be 2020? 2020 is available in the business office. And I'd like to resolve to approve the minutes of the Board of Education meeting of April 21st, 2020.
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
All
So
right.
talking about budget?
If we must.
We must.
All right. You guys are good? You can see that?
Yes, thank you.
I lost Jill way over here.
Yep.
All right, so I'm gonna start, and Jill's gonna jump in from time to time. So as many are aware, we're sort of we're building the budget as we get information, which is coming in piece by piece. Like everything during this COVID crisis, an answer to one question also almost always creates 47 new questions. So we've been asking for a date, asking for a date, asking for a date. So we finally received a date in which the budget vote will be held. And then now we have 100 new questions regarding what that actually means for the school district. So we're going to do our best to provide an overview of what we know right now. And I don't want to oversell it because there's a lot that we still don't know. And every day we're hoping to get a little more information so we can make an informed decision moving forward regarding our budget. So some of the current information that we already have, just to quickly take a step back, last board meeting, we spoke a little bit about our need to make up approximately $568,000. That was due to lost state aid by rolling back to the previous year's number, as well as loss in revenue and interest. And we were able to do that through those sort of first three priorities: reduction of the current budget for $118,000, maximization of state aid for $180,000, and rollover of savings during the closure period for $280,000. And that's how we were able to make up for that first deficit that we were aware of. So since that meeting, we've reached the end of that first look back period, which was April 30th. And the state government had put that into place and to examine their revenues. And then if the revenues were less than 1%, if they were more than 1% below projections, that they were going to cut more aid. And if they were above 1% above projections, then they would consider restoring. But the caveat of that is schools are not expected to hear sort of any numbers associated with that look back period until May 15th, which wasn't a big deal until June 9th became the date of our budget vote. So that was the next piece. That June 9th is now the official vote date. All voting will be done by absentee ballots. So there'll be postcards that go home, and the postcards will sort of explain the process. And then all qualified voters will receive an absentee ballot, which will be sent to their house for them to fill out and return. And it'll be sent with a stamped envelope to return it, so voting can happen at no cost to the community member. We anticipate budget adoption to be May 19th, but that's subject for conversation during this board meeting. Our next scheduled meeting is May 21st. That's a little late, but if we move it from Tuesday to Thursday, that buys us enough time to be able to print the ballots and get the postcards and get the information out to the community. So we can certainly follow up on that, but my recommendation is to reschedule the next board meeting from the 21st to the 19th and make that our budget adoption date. Our final budget hearing and business meeting would then be March 26th, and those dates keep us in line with that June 9th vote. The reality is we're building a budget without all the information we need. I know in years past, there's been times where the budget was voted on without knowing your final aid numbers, but sort of the caveat there was the number you didn't know was how much the aid was going up or if it was going up. This time around, it's the opposite. The caveat here, the unknown is how much it's going down. So it makes it very challenging to create a budget when you don't know what your revenues are going to be from the state level. Another unknown is that a failed budget may result in an automatic austerity budget. In a normal voting timeline, we would have the opportunity to put a budget vote out to the public twice. And only after it was voted down twice would we be forced to go to an austerity budget, which comes with all sorts of rules about how money can be spent and what it can be spent on. And we'll talk more about that later in the presentation. But that's certainly a scary thought where we're changing the voting process. If the budget goes down, we would automatically go to austerity, which we'll talk more about later, but it's over another $500,000 of cuts. We're still anticipating the additional loss of state aid on May 15th. And because we've already we sort of already hit the first three priorities of reducing the current budget, maximizing state aid, and rolling over our savings, we anticipate that any additional loss in state aid is going to have a direct impact on staffing and programs. There's just simply nowhere else for us to look for that money. If we're forced to go to an austerity budget, now we're looking at the potential impact on extracurricular activities, cultural arts, athletics. Again, as I had mentioned before, that would be over $500,000 in addition to whatever loss in state aid we would have already received. So even now you're getting to the point where even staffing is not enough to make up the deficit. We would have to be forced to look at other programs like after school activities, cultural arts, and athletics. And I just want to make it clear that the revenue we're losing this year does not go away for the next budget cycle. If we get $1 million cut in state aid, next year's budget starts $1 million behind where we projected it starting. And we're still forced to make up that $1 million gap. And that just continues every year moving forward. We're going to constantly be trying to make up the gap that we're presented this year. We don't anticipate the state giving us 2 years worth of state aid 1 year in order to make up for it. So there's a lot of fear about what this means down the road after this year. It's important to note this year we have unanticipated savings because of the closure period, and that's what's helping us sort of get through the first round of cuts. We have no reason to believe that those savings will exist moving forward, which would make it even more difficult to make up that same gap in future years. So I just wanted to put that out there. So the priority recaps that we had already done, we removed $118,000 from the budget that was presented in January. We changed how we purchased, really specific to technology in this case. That's aid we would typically get back in future years. We purchased it this year, so we get the aid back to help offset that deficit, the $568,000. And I spoke a little bit about this closure savings from the closure period. Next steps. Everyone heard the governor say that state aid could be cut by 20%, which is a scary number. If you look at the bottom of this slide, we're projecting for 10%. 10% loss in state aid would be another $1,100,000 that we would have to cut from our budget. 20% would be 2.2 million, would be devastating. So we're hopeful that that does not come, but we have to be prepared to make upwards of $1 million of additional cuts. And then that's on top of the 600,000 that we already cut out of the budget just to make up for the loss in state aid. The next bullet would be another $500,000 on top of that, would be a decrease in the tax levy if we were forced to go to an austerity budget. So I know that's a lot of information. Is there any questions about that side? Or Jill, is there anything that you should add?
No, I mean, I can just go on and then we can have questions at the end, because a lot of the information you talked about, I'm going to kind of go over and repeat because I want to impress upon everyone what exactly it is we're saying, maybe in a different way, so that other people who don't understand it completely can try and grasp it.
Okay.
All right. So again, this is the timeline. It's in this is the format that we'll have posted online, but it's all the dates that you just went over with everyone, ending with the June 9th date of the budget vote. And there's all dates along the way there that we have to meet certain deadlines, you know, a school tax report card, and then posting of the budget online, adoption of the budget and so forth, and mailing of all the notices and posting of the legal ads. So all of that information is contained in this budget timeline, and this will be posted on our website. Oh, I can't move it forward. Sorry. So again, scenario A is what Dr. Luff just went over. It's a cut that we originally received in our original projected budget, cut last April, on April 1st, I believe, when the state budget was enacted, $568,000. Again, maximizing our state aid. We're going to consider that done. I put a check mark next to it. You know, if everything stays the same, this will be the scenario that we're able to go with. Scenario A, which is the maximizing our state aid, reducing our budget slightly, and also, I'm sorry, what was the third thing? You went ahead too fast.
Right. The budget cuts, the savings from the closure period, and the state aid.
Oh, the closure period savings, correct. Sorry about that. Okay, and then the scenario B is, now I mentioned the 20% aid loss again because the governor is threatening that. We don't really know what that means, and we're hoping that the 1.1 million, which is half of that, 10%, would be the maximum amount, and I'm hoping that it's none of that. But right now we don't know. So we have to plan for that. Again, check off the first two items. We're going to maximize whatever we can in expense-based aids. We're going to utilize our savings from the closure period. Some of them we knew at the last meeting. There could be some additional ones as we sum up or close out the fiscal year, now that we know that the school year has actually ended. And there could be some more than in addition to the 280,000, but until I go through all of the motions of closing out purchase orders and paying vendors and seeing what we don't have to pay and we do have to pay, I won't know exactly what that number is. But it's in that ballpark. And so additional budget reductions because of the $1.1 million estimate. It could mean a cut in any of these things. Extracurricular activities, including sports, stipends and clubs, perhaps some elective offerings at the high school or in other buildings, increased class sizes, materials and supplies, some building and maintenance supplies, music or theater options, BOCES programs, field trips, arts and education, administrative costs, any of the staffing, monitors, teaching assistants, office personnel, custodial, teaching positions, and again, transportation outside of the home to school mandates. I mean, any of these things are gonna, you know, they're devastating to the program, to the school district, but a combination of these things is what I would obviously see happening, not in one particular area, but depending on what that loss number is, would be what areas of the budget we would have to impact. And scenario C, again, that's our worst case, in addition to cuts, having to realize a contingency budget. So the cuts don't include what a contingency budget means to us. It's an additional $531,000. That is the reverting back to the prior year's tax levy. And again, during a contingency budget, it means outside groups have to be charged for use of facilities, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, field use, even by Parks and Recreation or other outside groups, League of Women Voters. Mentioning those groups, there could be more. And I want to mention this one because I know it's evident to people that we are continuing with the capital project. And when I say capital improvement expenditures, unless directly related to health and safety, this does not include our capital project that has already been voter approved and passed, and the money that for that project does not come from the budget. It comes from its own separate budget that has already been established and can only be used for that purpose. So in a contingency budget, the project would not be affected, but any other new capital improvement type expenditures, unless they were related to health and safety, could not be done. And any equipment costs that are not directly related to health and safety could not be purchased. So, I mean, that kind of sums up what we know at this point. It's a sense of, having to proceed with caution at this point. And, what we don't know is the biggest problem is we can't make any kind of, it's hard to make any kind of prediction based on such a vast number that the governor is throwing out there. He's not giving us any sense of, between this and that number. And he's not saying what the 20% represents. Does it represent the aid that's across the state, and is it going to affect each region of the state differently, or is it 20% of each individual's school district's aid? He hasn't been specific in naming that. So I guess the questions at this time would probably be the best way to approach this. I don't know, Jeremy, do you have questions from the public or?
Not specific to the presentation, so I
Okay.
have one that I'll do afterwards.
So Jill, prior to 6 weeks ago, we were looking at a tax levy that didn't exceed the cap, that was under 2%. And now we've already looked at a 250% cut, or 2.5 times what our levy increase would have been. And now we're looking at another 500% of what that levy would have been, and possibly at another $500,000 on top of that. Has there been any discussion at all? And I haven't seen it, and I'm sure it's the third rail. There's been no discussion at all about modification of the tax levy cap at this point, correct?
No, there's no modification of how we calculate the tax levy cap. The governor has not spoken to that at all. There was a thought at one point that any school district putting out a budget under the cap was, I think School Boards Association was looking for that to just be pushed through as a responsible budget, but that has not taken place, and they're still expecting us to adhere to that tax cap calculation. So no, it hasn't changed.
And ultimately, in the scope of what these cuts would be, the 2% is almost immaterial. When, we're talking about 10 or 20% reductions on top of what we've already reduced. That 2% is really almost non-existent.
Right.
Beyond that, Jeremy, you mentioned that we could be forced to go straight to austerity budget, but was it just there was no conversation about it, or that was actually spoken about?
It has not been addressed. The question has been asked, but we have not received any guidance that says it would be possible. From a timeline perspective, it would be extremely hard to fit it in before July 1st, before the next fiscal year begins, given the number of days you would have to provide that budget number by prior to the actual vote. Plus, it would mean remailing absentee ballots to every community member again, every qualified voter in the community.
I know we budget for election costs. What is this going to do to that?
I don't know what the exact trade-off is. There will be some sense of a trade-off. If you remember this year, we were going to be forced to rent voting machines. So now we're obviously not doing that. But the mailing costs alone for the absentee ballots is over $12,000, about $12,500 for the printing and mailing and stuff like that. So I don't know how close we are.
Right, but the voting machines were not something that we did budget for because we weren't aware that we were going to be needing them this year. So it's not even a savings because we never actually budgeted for renting those machines. We were told in December that we were going to need to rent them. So it is like kind of a trade-off that we don't have to use them now, and it's purely by accident that happened. But I'm sure there's going to be some costs related to it that we weren't originally going to have, except we don't have to have as many people on board the day of the election. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there.
Okay.
Is there a specific date that the ballots have to be mailed?
Yes, there is. It's on the timeline. Maureen?
Yeah, I'm looking now.
Can you hear us?
May 25th.
Yep.
May 25th.
Thank you.
Okay.
Is that the ballot or the postcard?
The ballot. The postcard doesn't have a date. It's just recommended it goes out as soon as possible.
Right.
And the only way to return is to mail it, or can they be dropped off?
They must, it's saying by being mailed in, but if I was here and somebody handed me, I would of course take it. But they can't count on the offices being open. This was the executive order because most of the district offices are not open. So they're saying they needed to be mailed.
Maureen, what are we going to do to ensure that people get their mail?
Right.
Because you've taken it to White Plains, you've taken it to the Putnam post office,
Yeah, the process is different. Maureen, you might want to.
NTS, which is the company that has handled our voter software for many years now, they have reached out to me about 2 weeks ago to tell me that if this ludicrous thing happens, they could help us, never thinking it would. But so they're going to actually put the entire packet together. They're going to create the postcards, get those out first to every registered voter, plus every tax listing that we have, because that has to go to every qualified voter. And you don't have a list of who the qualified voters are.
Okay.
So they're going to do the best they can to reach those people. They'll explain the process of what it means to be eligible to vote. To be eligible to vote, you must be registered in the end. There is no personal registration in the districts. They must register with the County Board of Elections or online through the Department of Motor Vehicles. I don't know why, but that's the other option they have. And then once those registrations or books are finished, NTS is going to pull all the registered eligible voters, and every one of them is going to get a ballot with a postage paid return envelope. And that $12,000 does not include the postage. And
postage paid only kick in if they actually mail it?
That's what they're working on, yes. They will not have to pay for those that don't return them.
Don't return, okay.
It requires a certain permit.
Okay.
That we're working on.
Okay.
And they have to be returned in 5 o'clock on June 9th. They can be open. We have no idea whether there'll be hundreds, thousands. We have no idea. We have no idea. We'll have a better idea leading up to the date, though, obviously.
Yeah.
No, we won't have to worry. Is there any restrictions or requirements as to format and size, or is it going to be? Are they going to be able to? Because obviously the regular computer ballots were much bigger. We don't have to worry about anything.
No, it's not going to look like that.
Right?
It'll be smaller, and I think all the information will be on the front.
We are doing our separate mailing as well for the budget newsletter, only because we have to send out the budget notice. It's still required to be sent out. That'll be sent out. It has to be in the mail May 26th, based on the dates that we're using. And that information, you know, is budget information that they'll be getting. But the most informing budget information will be the budget itself, the document itself. It will be available in the main office. I mean, in our main office, in the district office, and also online. But, you know, until we have a budget put together, it's not going to be until May 19th that it'll be available.
Okay.
But so it's not going to be available until we adopt it?
Correct.
Right.
Well, it never is anyway.
No, the total budget, the detailed budget would not be available until May 19th. Mind you, that's only about 2 weeks away.
Exactly. 2 weeks away. Exactly.
And we don't really have all the information to put it together.
Right, we won't have the information we need to make a budget for a week and a half.
Is this that building the airplane while it's in the air thing?
So,
I think it's flying the airplane while it's still in the hangar.
You know, so don't get under the impression, we already have a budget that was built prior to all of this. I think it just, you know, we have to amend the areas of it that are going to be impacted, and we have to make decisions about which ones will be impacted. It's not an easy thing to do, but it's not something that, you know, hasn't already been started and, you know, partially put together. So.
And just one more question. So with going to Plan B, Jeremy, I think you had mentioned it the last time, that starts looking at programs and staffing a little bit.
Yes.
That starts delving into existing budget numbers.
Yeah, anything on top of this almost 600,000 that we've already cut is going to impact staffing and programs.
Okay.
the other thing, did we have to put more money in the budget for new health and safety regulations, hand sanitizers in every building, extra cleaners, any of that kind of stuff? Or we don't have to budget for that?
Not yet.
No, but I mean, are we anticipating that we're going to have to add masks and whatever? I mean, that there's going to be a cost to reopening?
I mean, I know that we've been purchasing that type of material. There's actually, BOCES is creating sort of a shared service around it where districts and municipalities are banding together to purchase these type of materials in bulk to get discounted pricing. So, I mean, these are things we have in school every day anyway. So it may increase the quantity of it. I don't know if what the mask thing could be, if students are required to wear masks, if the district's required to provide them, or if they can wear their own. I think we're going to have to address those issues as they arise.
And we're starting to purchase some of those things now this year before the, before it begins, because we have to have them on hand. And certainly because of the closure and because of some of the savings, those things have already been looked into to try and purchase them now before next year.
I was thinking of thermometers. Do you need 20 in a building? Like, just whatever. I know they're going to be, I assume they're going to be costs associated with how to bring students back safely.
Yeah, we've already started purchasing things like that, the infrared thermometers and stuff like that.
Okay.
Not 20 per building, no.
No,
I think we bought 6.
We're looking at what's out there and available too, because there's so many different kinds you can purchase. You want to make but there's no one that's, the state is saying this is the one that you have to have. So we've actually ordered a few to test them and see how they work and see what we like and think what's the most cost effective to buy. And, we'll do that. And then when we're ready to purchase more in bulk, we will if we have to.
Okay.
I wish we had more information to give you, but we don't.
Crazy.
I mean, it does. It's probably not. I guess it is budget question, but I guess it does get into all the planning that's going to need to go into place, presuming that there is a September, and what it will look like, or how it will be different, and what we can and can't do those are all things. And I don't know if there's a timeline that came out of SED or from the governor as far as when they're expecting those plans.
Not yet, no.
No.
There's been a push for the creation of a date. I know the August 1st date had been thrown out there,
Oof.
but even that sounds too late
Yeah.
to know all of that information. But we're having constant discussions about what this could look like, what this could look like, what this could look like, but we're sort of working in this theoretical world until we have more information regarding what's going to actually be the guidance and what options we're going to have. So there's lots of things we consider. We have lots of sort of ideas we've thrown up on the wall, and now we need guidance to know which direction is the right direction to move. So I think we actually inadvertently answered the question from the community, which was exactly that. If we received any guidance from the state regarding the opening of schools or the resumption of sports programs. So the answer right now is no. We have not received anything. So we're sort of working with hypothetical and theoretical ideas, and we're waiting for that guidance to know what our reality will be when we get there. So anything and everything is still on the table as we await guidance.
Do you get the sense that educators will be part of the discussion of how things go? Like the committee that's going to decide, or the...
So that's an interesting question. The State Department of Education is putting together a committee of stakeholders to sort of develop guidance, recommendations, suggestions regarding what the opening of school may look like. But I guess sort of the flip side of that is that committee really holds no power or authority to make those decisions. It's going to ultimately be up to the State Department of Health and the governor's office. That's who's going to make those recommendations. That's who's going to release the guidance. So I know that when it came to the budget vote, right, there were certainly strong recommendations that were made by the education department. And it's not my belief that a single one of them was went into the actual decision making that happened around it. So we'll have to wait and see. So there's efforts underway to offer sort of an educational perspective on what opening school may look like, but it will ultimately be the governor working with his Department of Health that makes the recommendations.
Yeah, I asked Natalie earlier, and I just worry. I mean, I certainly want students to be safe. That's paramount. But I also don't want to lose what we know is best educationally for children in deciding how their safety is going to be protected. I would just hoping that there are going to be educators as part of the decision making. Because a business person, we're not making cookies or, airplanes. We're, educating children, and I don't want it to become, well, in a factory, this is the way you'd handle it. Well, but we're not a factory, and I need somebody there to remind them of that. I don't know.
So I know that I'm going to participate. Dr. Wills has reached out to me and to participate with the people up in Albany dealing with special education and what that can look like. And I'm gathering some of my colleagues from the area just to talk about what a reopen could possibly look like, especially for, many of our students with disabilities are vulnerable, and what that can look like. So hopefully he'll listen. We'll see.
Speak loudly, Natalie. We're gonna give you a megaphone.
Exactly. Yes. I don't, I'm known to speak loud enough.
And Barbara, I don't, if you can hear me.
I can.
Okay. You know, we're also looking ahead at, you know, beginning to address developing a strategic restart plan for September and what that will look like. I think a lot of our summer work will be surrounding that restart plan and teacher collaborations and looking at what children and students were not able to have during this closure period, and how we will make sure to address all of those standards and make sure that students are caught up. So it's definitely a topic of conversation in all of our admin meetings.
Okay, and do you think, like, are we gonna have staff working over the summer on this kind of thing?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
I said, are we gonna have staff working over the summer on these kind of, are we thinking summer curriculum work for this kind of thing?
Yes, and I think the majority of our summer curriculum work is going to be working on the reopening of schools and making sure that we address everything that was possibly missed during this closure, and how do we make sure that we assess right away, find out where students are and what they need.
Okay, good. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Keep us in the loop.
Absolutely, yeah. It's every day we're talking about that, and during all of our meetings with staff and grade level department meetings, those are the things that we're talking about.
We're also having a meeting with a lot of the office staff on Thursday to talk about what it could look like for us, just as sort of the first round of people that will likely enter and begin working from the offices, which many of us are doing as much as we can remotely, but also going into the office. So those conversations are going on, you know, like Jeanette said, just all the time.
Okay. That makes me feel better.
Yes. And the principals, you know, obviously the principals are very much leading that work with their respective buildings and with their grade levels, and that will continue over the summer.
Okay.
And Natalie, I don't know if it fits, I guess it would fit into this conversation in terms of special ed services. Are we confident that what we're offering will prevent any request for compensatory services later on?
So I think that, you know, for most of our students, we're providing as many services as we can. There are some families who, you know, are finding it challenging. I think those conversations, until we open back up and we see how much time we've lost and look back over sort of globally, you know, how much has everybody regressed and how much
Right.
each person. So those conversations will go on, meetings will go on, and we'll certainly have to address some of it, but I feel very confident that all of our related service providers and our special education staff is on top of their students and working with families to meet the needs not only of students, obviously the students are in mind first and foremost, but also families, working with families, making sure that what they're doing can work for a family in their situation, which is big. It's hard right now for a lot of families who are working from home as well and trying to teach their own children, working, you know, it's hard on everybody. So those conversations will happen once we open back up.
Okay.
Dr. Luft, I don't know if you're going to address this during your time, but I wanted to ask, has there been any guidance at all on the closing of the end of the year, meaning middle schools and high schools typically have 7 to 10 days or whatever of finals, and what the plan is for those 7 to 10 days? If there's a dictate, since the 180 days is being waived, who determines how far we go?
So that is a very interesting question. So there is a very valid argument to, from a contractual standpoint, to ending the school year early, to avoid contractual issues regarding the number of days worked in excess of the contractual work year. My fear, taking a step back from our individual decisions, our individual contract with our teachers union here, my fear is, or my concern is, I believe districts who did the right thing, and by the right thing, I mean districts who started distance learning day one, like we did. It was the right thing to do for our students. It was the right thing to do for our families. It was the right thing to do for our teachers. It was a tremendous amount of work to get there and a lot of learning along the way, but we started day one because it was the right thing to do for students. Some districts took 2 to 3 weeks to start their online instruction by using snow days and using their rescheduling their spring break. And I'm sure they had a variety of reasons for doing so. But now we find ourselves in a situation where the districts who did the right thing and started right away are at risk of running well over their contractual obligations in terms of school year, while those districts who waited 3 weeks are totally fine. So it's my belief that there has to be some remedy to that situation. And we haven't received any guidance, and I don't know how much flexibility I have. We can do the math of figuring out what costs more, paying teachers to work extra days or losing state aid for those days they would otherwise be working. Because it may very well be less expensive to lose aid. But it's a bad situation, and I'm hopeful that the state provides some flexibility to school districts to allow them to correct their school year in a way that makes them right by their contractual obligations. So that part's an issue. Assuming that part is corrected one way or the other, or I guess if it's even not corrected, we have no intention to just arbitrarily end school when regents would have otherwise began. So if the governor tells us we need to be open and we need to be in school, then we're going to continue to teach students. And obviously they're not learning as much as they would otherwise be learning in the classroom. So there's still plenty of content for them to get through, plenty of review they can do to prepare them for the next year. So that time, assuming that we're obligated to be here for it, will be well used. But I am hopeful that the governor is going to provide schools who are in our situation some flexibility, so we do not end up in impact bargaining for teachers working in excess of their number of contractual days, because that could very well be more expensive than the aid otherwise lose by not teaching those days.
And then as part of the reopen, I mean, I guess there's got to be planning for planned regression and how much time the first quarter of next year, assuming we're all starting in September, we'll kind of have to do some rebuilding if that's the case. I mean, obviously it's going to be part of the planning. I guess part of the summer work is to design what the beginning looks like, in addition to all the safety pieces and the health pieces. But the actual the summer work, I'd imagine, Jeanette, that would be a big part of it, is figuring out when do you start new content. I mean, I guess it's different based on the years. Whatever the year is, because obviously you're not going to go back to teach chemistry if they're already in physics type of situation, unless it's necessary. So I'm assuming that's a big part of the summer work as well.
Yes, absolutely. I think that we're going to look at individual, grade levels and departments. I know that some grade levels are even looking at that right now. We have our elementary school grade levels who are kind of identifying prioritized standards that they know that they need to meet during this closure period in order to make sure that students are best prepared for the opening of school. But all of those things, and it really is dependent upon building and department and grade level, but all of those things are what we plan to spend a majority of our summer work working on, and making sure that we do some early assessments and get a good baseline for where students are at and what they need.
Yeah, so we're trying to address that issue at both ends. We're emphasizing those power standards, which are that we've already gone through. Our instructional support specialists have already identified those power standards, which are going to be essential for students to master, to utilize them for the next school year. So that's really going to be the focus of our work in June. And then obviously we're asking everyone to rethink the beginning of their school year, their first month, to provide opportunities to sort of work backwards or review the standards that the students should have mastered, those same type of standards that'll be essential for them to be successful moving forward. And that's the way it's going to work in those standard-based curriculum. Obviously, to your point, if you missed the last quarter of chemistry, it's not necessarily going to harm you as you move into physics. It's different in different departments, especially at the high school level. But we're trying to address that gap both this year and again at the beginning of next school year.
And also, I just want to say that the implementation of the next generation learning standards for grades K through 8 have been pushed back a year. So although I felt very confident that we were ready for implementation in September, it does give us that additional year.
Will that change the, this is very micro at this point, will that change the trajectory of Science 8?
No.
No, no.
Our plan is still to move forward with Science 8 for all next year.
I know there was a budget component to that, wasn't there?
No,
Scheduling component.
schedule had one.
If we continue to adhere science, we would lessen our flexibility in terms of the scheduling because the earth science comes with the extra lab period.
Sorry, folks, I didn't mean to talk so much.
Any other questions about the budget presentation?
So on May 19th, which is our next meeting, we will have a budget to review and approve.
We're going to have a number.
All righty.
We hope. None of us may like the number, but we'll have one.
Okay.
Yeah, so before we move on, are we going to be we'll be changing the scheduled meetings that are coming up for the rest of the month, right?
Yeah, so is everyone okay with the shift from the 21st to the 19th so we can publicize that?
That works.
Tuesday seems to become our official meeting day anyway.
Well, April, and it always was. And
I know everyone is so busy.
No, that works.
That's fine.
That was me.
That's good.
Aye.
All right, so our second presentation has to do with the continuing of the moratorium on approving admission for non-resident children of professional staff.
Okay, do you want me to take that, Jeremy?
You could take it, but I want to throw out an option here.
Okay, go ahead.
So I know this obviously predates me being here, and you guys know a lot more about this than I do, but in just taking a quick look at it, this may be the opportunity or the time to consider allowing staff to tuition students in. Our enrollment is not exactly bursting at the seams. We're considering options where we would allow students from neighboring districts to tuition into the IB program. And I think if we're going to consider allowing students to tuition into the IB program, that's a slippery slope if we're not allowing other tuition needs. Again, this is just from a very lay point right here, but I understand that there's special education needs and what happens when students come in with profound disabilities and could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I just thought it may be an opportunity to have a quick conversation about how the moratorium was reached, and if it's something that we want to, I wouldn't say to lift it now, but if it's something that we wanted to study for the future.
I would definitely be in agreement to study in the future, because what I was going to bring up about the moratorium is I think our policy needs to be changed one way or another. We currently have a policy that allows teachers to bring their children into school without tuition, and that's what we had the moratorium on. We stopped that probably 8 years ago, Joe?
2011.
11, yeah.
Okay.
11, 12 school
To
year.
coincide with
Yeah.
the great tax cap.
Okay, and a lot of things happened in 2011.
Yeah, that was without tuition
Yeah, right.
for staff members, right?
Right, and that's
So-
not at all what I'm suggesting. I'm not.
No, I understand that, but I think our policy still says that, and we kept it in because that's why we do an every year moratorium, because we've still had kids we grandfathered in, and we still have two. One's a 10th grader and one's a 12th grader. So I think this is a good time to look at changing that policy one way or another.
Right, and right now, in addition to that, besides those students that were already in for those faculty members, any new student could be tuitioned in from those particular families.
From those families only, not from other teachers.
Right.
From those families.
I've always felt that it was a good policy. I wasn't happy with necessarily not charging tuition, but I think as a parent, if you had small children and they were in the district that you were in, you weren't rushing out at the end. You weren't leaving right away. You were more of a part of the community. I've always felt that it was something that I wanted to look at again.
What happened?
Did anybody else lose Barbara?
Barbara froze, but I don't know if everyone else did.
Yeah, she's still there.
You're back.
She's here. Her voice froze.
Okay, sorry, can you get that again, Barbara? You froze for a second.
No, I've always been hopeful that we were going to have this conversation again, because I believe that we get more out of our staff when their children are part of our district. Instead of them having to leave quickly to get home to another district to pick up their children or whatever. I feel like it makes them more a part of our community. And most of the teachers who teach here think we have an amazing district and they would like our children to be here. I don't think they should come for nothing. I think they should be tuitioned.
That was the major justification for that.
Right. It was at a time where we were really having our first set of real changes in numbers, and having the unknown of having some teacher children could push us from 4 sections to 5.
Right.
You know, there was a lot of our classes were full within the smaller numbers of sections.
Well, because we're entering the kind of the same world we're entering right now, where it's going to a couple of years in a row of staffing cuts. So we were not sure on where our class sizes were going to go. So that's why the decision was made. I do wonder, however, for researching, would we be looking at some of the possibilities would be looking at kind of a standard tuition amount, or would it be the actual tuition amount if there are more costly to educate students that come into the district? That's the biggest question, right?
Yeah, I mean, I believe other districts, and Natalie, you can chime in because I'm sure you know better than I do. Other districts that do something similar, some districts have clauses in there where tuition is only an option if the child is not going to sort of create the need for another section. I've seen that language before. And then other districts have language where if the student becomes classified, that the district of residence is billed back for those services for the student. Like they would have to agree to be able to do that, or the district would not allow the student to be tuitioned in. Do you have any information on that, Nat? Do you know anything about that? You're on mute, Nat. You're on mute.
I don't have I don't know about a written policy on that in particular. But I know that, different districts do different things. I know that the district in which I live just started, they just created a tuition rate for all students. So I think we just need to look. I don't know specifically about students with disabilities though. Like whether contractually.
And do we have any idea about the volume?
I mean, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say there is, there are established non-resident tuition rates established. They're published every year for our district, for every district. They base it on our expenditure reporting at the end of the year, and it's the non-resident tuition rate, and there's a student with disability non-resident tuition rate, and it goes by grade level, and it dictates to us what we're allowed to charge. But I think we're also allowed to do our own methodology as long as it makes sense and that we're consistent in using that methodology for anybody that we're billing for.
And I think I'm just going to jump back in here. I think what Jeremy was speaking about is there is something what's called district of location and district of residency. So for students with disabilities, so we would be the district of residency. So we would be the district of location. If a teacher lived outside of the district, we would become the district of location, and that district where the child should go to school would be the district of residency, and we would be able to bill a certain amount of tuition to that.
The same thing as people who go to parochial schools.
Just like that, yeah. And receive special education services.
Special education services, right, not full tuition.
Correct.
So, I mean, my recommendation wouldn't be just to charge the non-resident tuition rate. I would certainly look to come up with a rate that was discounted from sort of general public, but one that still brought in some revenue to offset what our anticipated expenses would be for that child coming in. Just to throw it out there. I thought it was something where revenue is getting slashed everywhere we look and both sides of the equation. So if there's anything we could do to generate more revenue, I thought it was worth the conversation.
Do we have any idea of the volume or the grade impact?
It would totally be up to the teachers who are willing. It's an unknown because it would be really hard to predict. We could certainly survey teachers and say, this is something we're considering. If this was an option, would you consider sending your child here for X amount of tuition? In my mind, I'm thinking the numbers would be very small.
Yeah, especially now. I mean, it's a different story than it was when the high school started and all these young teachers were hired at the same exact time, at the same, pretty much the same age, and have the same, all having kids around the same time. It's a different, staggered situation that we have.
There's a lot of complicating factors. I mean, your child doesn't go to school with their neighbors, and play dates with their classmates are now 40 minutes away. Like I couldn't imagine it would be an overwhelming number of individuals, but if you have a really high achieving student who would love to pursue an IB diploma, and the only option they have to do so would be through us, or the current language would not allow that to be an option. Even if we had tuitioned in someone from another district to do the same thing.
I agree with Barbara. It was a good fiscally prudent decision when we made it.
Yes.
And it was a loss in terms of those extra soft pieces of the teachers being part of the community and being around after school and all of that. So I would be more than open, Jeremy, to you and Jill, because you have so much free time, but do some research just in terms of.
I changed my mind.
I'm leaving now.
Could we ask the union? I know the union has asked me a couple of times. Can we ask the union to kind of poll their members and see if there's an interest?
Surveying teachers would be easy, but we would need to come up with a number first.
Well, we need to know what we can absorb, what we can absorb, what would be realistic.
Again, I still think we're talking handful of kids.
Mhm. For tuition, I agree.
5 would be a number I'd make up.
And I do have a concern about reduced tuition. So
Yeah,
I'll
I
just
do
put
too.
that up there. So I just
I
want to make
wouldn't
sure
do
that's
anything
voiced.
that's cost prohibitive, that's for sure.
Right.
You know, I mean, we'd have to be able to realize revenue on it, or it wouldn't obviously be worth doing for us. It's only gonna create more havoc for us if it's not a revenue generating situation.
I don't
Agree.
think
Right.
we can do
But it
that.
would be, what's the cost to fill an empty seat in a classroom?
What's the cost to fill an empty seat in a classroom? It depends on what comes along with it. And, you know, I mean, I think that those things all have to be looked at.
Well, and then
Right.
I'd like a little more education than we want to do now about what is the non-residential tuition. Like, that's set. That's not an arbitrary number we do. That is set, as Jill said. So what's behind that?
Right, there's a
Right.
huge formulas behind that, but
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, there are other methodologies we could use to come up with a number that you may think is more fair based on the fact that we may have a smaller class size. The only thing is those students move on from grade to grade to grade, and they do, you know, those class sizes change. So I just don't see any reason why we couldn't offer it since we are looking for a way to generate some revenue, but I think it would depend on the numbers, and it would depend on what number we're asking for, whether that would be worth it for them or not, because they all live in places where they pay taxes and everything else. So it is something to consider on both sides.
Right. And we have a lot of educators that live in Putnam Valley for the schools also. So
Mhm.
Right. Okay. So this is a resolution, correct, if I
No.
recall?
Just a
No.
discussion.
discussion.
This
Okay.
discussion.
Okay. All right. So, Dr. Loft, we've kind of probably touched some of your superintendent report, but have at it.
All right. So my first late breaking news is that schools are closed for the rest of the year. I know, as I had sent out on my message, although certainly expected by many, I think hearing it certainly brought a realization that many were not looking forward to. I could speak personally to my own 2 boys, who I would not describe them as a chipper in the morning, looking forward to going to school kind of boys. I would more refer to them as devastated when dad didn't call a snow day and they have to go to school because they somehow think I control their snow days. But it was funny. They celebrated the initial closing of schools. 48 hours later, they were crying that they wanted to go back to schools. And they were truly devastated when they heard the news, even though living with the superintendent, they expected the news. So it certainly had a profound effect on many educators I know sort of had this sense of devastation. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention our senior class, students that were holding out hope for some sense of normalcy for their end of their high school career, looking for the same experience in those end of year ceremonies and traditions that all their peers have had. And as someone with an athletic background, to really be able to sort of live out your dreams as in your final season of a spring sport that you had been practicing for since you were 5 years old. So I know that there was a lot of angst amongst our senior class, and I know that the teachers and all the staff here and the administrators feel terrible for them. So Dr. Jerry and I crafted a letter and sent it to the senior class. We actually have a Zoom call set up with them on Friday, open to the entire class, just to sort of answer any questions they have, hopefully alleviate any concerns that we can, and to provide them a forum to share ideas and ways that they would like to sort of honor those traditions that they're unfortunately not going to be able to celebrate in the same capacity that previous years have. So all of that related to the end of the year closing piece. On a much happier note, Sam Oliverio, the Putnam Valley Town Supervisor, was in contact with me. He was actually able to partner with Richard Shea. So Richard Shea is the supervisor of the town of Phillipstown. He was able to obtain a large number of gift certificates for food. And to partner with Putnam Valley, he actually donated $10,000 of food credit cards, gift cards for food to the town of Putnam Valley. And then Sam Oliverio immediately contacted myself and asked if the school would be the vehicle in which we would distribute those gift meal cards to our needy families. So I'm going to get them from Mr. O tomorrow. I know they're going to write up, Eric Gross is going to be here to write up a quick article about it. And I know Natalie has been really instrumental in working with our clinical staff to identify families in need, to help to get those families whatever we can provide. And so I'll be handing those gift cards quickly over to Dr. Doherty to allow her to facilitate the distribution of those cards to our families. So that's a very positive note that I wanted to be sure to share. Along those same lines, we continue to receive emails from community members who are looking to help and donate. And again, Dr. Doherty and her staff is helping to facilitate those connections and to help provide those communities in need, those members of our community in need, with the resources that they need. So I know the food pantry is involved and many other organizations. So I just wanted to send that out there. Again, something special about Putnam Valley in a time of need and the way the community comes together. So I wanted to make sure I mentioned all that. Along those same lines, Feeding Westchester will be at the JV Mall tomorrow at 3:30. So this is actually something that my wife arranges through the Lakeland School District, but it's available to really anyone who comes. And obviously Putnam Valley has residents that live in Westchester. They've actually outgrown their space at George Washington Elementary School, and they have since moved it to the JV Mall to deal with the number of people in need who are coming to get food. So that's unique. They have fresh produce, they have meat. It's well beyond the typical canned goods and non-perishable items. So anyone in need, I would advise you to check out Feeding Westchester JV Mall tomorrow at 3:30. Again, on some positive notes, our high school received a recognition school designation from the New York State Education Department. So that's a huge accomplishment of the efforts of our high school staff, administration, and students. Our music department was once again awarded a Best Community for Music Education. So that's an award they've received for many years. I wanted to make sure to acknowledge that they had received it again for this school year. It's been a week of appreciations. I know Principal Appreciation Day recently passed. We're currently in Teacher Appreciation Week. I think today is technically Teacher Appreciation Day. I believe tomorrow is Nurse Appreciation Day. So be sure to go out there and get any of your nurses' presents. And we certainly get a lot of emails asking about the end of school year events. I know we spend a lot of time talking about the seniors and graduation, but there's certainly other groups that have similar concerns. Fourth graders moving up to the middle school, eighth graders moving up to the high school. So these conversations are conversations we have on a daily basis. We're trying to find ways in which we can still honor these students and their accomplishments in a way that respects whatever guidance we have at the given time. So there's lots of ideas out there. We're preparing sort of virtual celebrations because that's the most likely way in which these events are going to have to be held. But we want to make sure that these the times don't pass and the students they just miss those recognitions. So I would anticipate more information on what's to come, but reassure everyone that we are working to find ways to celebrate these students and their accomplishments. As mentioned in the previous presentation, the budget vote is now scheduled for June 9th. All voting will be done via paper ballot. I wanted to recognize a staff member. Without permission to share her name, I won't. But we had a staff member who contacted us. She had received the stimulus check from the government and had requested that she be able to donate that stimulus check back to the school district for the school district to use for supplies and materials and stuff like that. So I thought that was a really noble effort, a really noble thing for someone to offer. And I wanted to make sure to recognize it without embarrassing the individual by using their name. But that was something I thought was really thoughtful. And I think that's it. Any questions about anything?
How's the construction going?
So the construction's moving along. From the get-go, they've known that there was a possibility of school reopening. So they were only able to sort of move so far where they knew, if given the word, that they could sort of board up the areas they needed to board up and be able to reopen schools. So now that they know for a fact that that is not happening, the work's continuing. The middle school, the demolition process is well underway. I would say maybe 70+% complete in terms of what they have to demolish. So that work is continuing. The Health and Wellness Center also is continuing. They have the forms up to pour the walls, the footings, the concrete footings have already been poured. And they're already sort of working to create the base layer that the field will sit on. So all the work is certainly on time, and I would say I'm hoping we'll be ahead of time, barring any roadblocks we hit along the way. There's a bit of an unknown in terms of the supply chain, of what access they will have to the materials they need, given the fact that some manufacturers are open, some may be closed. So there's definitely delays in receiving some equipment, but we're so far ahead of schedule. We're hoped to still be able to obtain those things we need and get them installed in a timely manner. So things have been going really positive. We've been working really hard with our contractors to keep any revisions and change orders at a minimum to preserve our contingency budget. And as everyone's aware, we're hopeful to keep enough money in our contingency budget to do more of the work that we had originally hoped to do at the middle school. So that remains to be our priority, is to save as much as possible with hopes that we can do additional work at the middle school.
Because some of what we budgeted was for workers to work nights and weekends, right, in order to get it done. And
there was going to be times when that was going to be needed, but there's definitely savings in not having contractors mobilize to do work and then leave for a period of time and then come back and remobilize and do more work. And that certainly would have been the case in some instances. Every time you do that, then you have to board up a space. So there's obviously labor and materials that go into sort of creating temporary walls and doing all of those things. So they're definitely able to move much faster in a much more seamless way than they would have otherwise been able to do if they were working second shift and knowing that students would be back in the hallways in a couple hours and having to take down temporary barricades and then put them back up and do all those things. So yeah, there's certainly not much positive about this entire thing. And if I was gonna hold on to any silver lining, it would be that piece. It wasn't anticipated, but it's certainly, the construction project is probably the one thing that's benefiting us right now, although I would gladly kick them all out of here tomorrow if we can reopen schools and have kids back.
True. Okay.
Mary, can I just ask one question about the end of the year acknowledgements, I guess, for lack of a better word, moving up? It does seem that in terms of June, virtual is going to be what and we don't know, but it is likely that the guideline is going to be about a virtual events or experiences. Would there be, if let's say and we should definitely do that within the time frame. If the guidelines change in August, would we offer an opportunity? I've asked some high school seniors have camped out on my lawn and have asked me this question. If they're allowed to get closer together or gather, if the guidelines change in August, would we have something? Would we be open to that, even if we do a virtual in June?
So we've certainly considered the options of from a high school graduation specifically, not necessarily the other ones, but the option of rescheduling it. I'm not overly optimistic that August is going to offer us anything different than June is going to.
Right.
There was some conversation about rescheduling it or doing something, some sort of celebration aligned with homecoming or in the fall, or another opportunity where students, typically our recent graduates, come back home anyway. So those are all still things we're considering. Whether it looks like a graduation or if it's more just a celebration or acknowledgement, we don't know. And we're still the same thing. We're still waiting guidance for what life will look like in October. There's no guarantee that when we get to October that things are going to be, that we're going to be able to have an event like that. When you think about the sheer numbers, I mean, I don't know the exact number, but I'll make one up, right? Our graduation ceremony involves well over 1,000 people. So the thought of bringing, and that's just graduation. If you're mixing it with homecoming and now you're bringing all the current students in as well, we're talking about a much larger number. I'm personally not overly optimistic that at any event that size would be allowed in October as well. But we're considering it. But a lot of it would be dependent upon student interest. I know it's now everyone. It sounds like a great idea, but when students leave and go to college, I don't know what percentage of our senior class we're going to get back for a long weekend in the fall for a pseudo graduation.
And I agree. I don't think we're looking at our graduation, even if in August or October. Maybe we'd have to look at only 2 adults. I'm thinking more of the kids' opportunity to be together.
Yep. No, we're certainly considering all of those.
Good. Okay. So do we have any other questions, Maureen? It's public contribution time.
We do not.
Okay. Anything else from anybody on the board?
No.
All right, so let's move in. We have a relatively small new business. Mr. Ferraro, will you start us off?
Resolve the recommendation, Superintendent of Schools to approve the auction and or disposal of kitchen equipment being removed from the middle school with no current value to the district as per document number 166/20, attached to the agenda and official minutes of this meeting.
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Sorry.
Number 2,
Resolved on recommendation of the Superintendent of Schools to approve the winter 2019 to 2020 postseason coaching stipends as per document number 167-20, attached to the agenda and official minutes of this meeting.
Second.
questions or comments?
These are the basketball team coaches, the wrestling coaches, the cheerleaders, and the indoor track coaches.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. I can see everybody say aye, so I don't have to do the nay thing. Number 3,
Resolved to approve the Westchester Putnam School Boards Association WPSBA 2020-21 nominating committee slate of officers and members of the Board of Directors, as well as the 2020-21 proposed budget, and authorize the Board of Education President to sign the WPSBA annual meeting ballot, document number 168/20, attached to the agenda and official minutes of this meeting, and also authorize Barbara Parmley as the board's voting delegate.
Second.
questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Number 4,
Resolved to approve the revisions to the budget timeline due to the June 9th 2020 budget and trustee vote as per document 169/20, attached to the agenda and official minutes of this meeting.
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor? Aye.
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 And number 5.
Resolved to approve the legal notice for the annual meeting vote of June 9th, 2020, as per document number 170/20, attached to the agenda and official minutes of this meeting.
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Maureen, any more questions?
Nope, just checked.
Anything else from anybody on the board? Then at this point, I would also just want to add, Jeremy, what you said, hearing on May 1st, schools will be closed was, just, I think as much as you expected it, it really was just so final. And I just want to express on behalf of the board to all of the students out there, regardless of grade, that we're proud of them. They're showing resiliency, probably more than we could ever show as adults, and just continue to school. I've heard somewhere the school buildings are closed, but schools are open and functioning. So keep up the good work, everybody, teachers, families, and children alike. And now I would like to resolve to convene an executive session for employment matters pertaining to multiple particular persons, possible removal of a corporation, and collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law, the Taylor Law, after which no further business will be conducted.
Second.
Questions or comments? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.